Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Hello, you're listening to the podcast, So There I Was. This is episode number 125 with Baron.
Nice. He hit everything but what?
I hit everything except the tiger.
Nice. Because, as luck would have it, he doesn't, let's put it this way, he doesn't have a tiger skin rug in his home to this day.
No, listen, this is historical.
Yeah,
this is another one of it seems like all these people we interview have amazing stories. This guy, this particular individual was actually part of history.
He was indeed.
In more than one occasion, and It was an absolute honor to sit down and talk to him.
It was indeed. He started off in 1966 in OCS, and we went through his early career, and we asked him about Eagle Pull, which he was involved in, and we started talking about Eagle Claw, and so we went into that. Eagle Claw was the Iranian hostage rescue attempt in April of 1980.
Yeah.
And for those who are familiar with that history, it didn't go well, and he was injured, and he tells us all about that. It was a fucking disaster.
Yeah, and Eagle Pull was 1975 evacuation planning for not Cameroon.
Yeah, Cambodia. And that's okay. We go into that in next week's show. And so based on that, we need to tell you folks what we're doing. We're going to shorten these shows down. This 90 minutes to 2 hours is apparently too long because the consumption of the shows is showing it.
Yeah, it's too long. We got some feedback. We got to shorten it up a little bit.
Yeah, so we're going to do that. This show is going to be about 45 minutes. Next week's show, also with Baron, is going to be at another 40, 45 minutes, something along those lines. So that's we're trying to listen to what you want to hear, and in the future, we're going to actually try and tighten it up and get it down to an hour with each guest, and break them up into half-hour shows so that you aren't losing interest. Isn't the best way to put it. Getting distracted and having to do other things. It's a busy world, so we're going to get out of your way, let you listen to Baron talk about Eagle Claw, his early aviation career, his time in Vietnam. Any advice for folks until next week?
Well, since he was a CH-53
this here's a true story.
Don't sit on the
collector. The pond
don't do it.
at night in the world's smallest cockpit on the tanker through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the...
So there I was, coming out of Vandergrift, which is right next to the rock pile in Vietnam, on my first tour over there, and we're coming home at about 4,000 feet, and all of a sudden, as we departed over bad guy land, there was a loud explosion. The aircraft did a hard turn to the left, and we found out our right engine had exploded or imploded and sending shrapnel through the cockpit and the cabin area. And the aircraft commander I was with decided it was time to say his last rites. Anyway, the aircraft had two engines on it, and at that time I found out that one engine won't keep the aircraft at altitude. So we slowly started sinking down. We couldn't make it down to Fubai, our home base. So we found Camp Eagle, which was an Army base in front of us, and tried to make it there. And that's...
Terrifying. That is how a terrifying aviation tale begins. Nothing worse than doing it over bad guy country, I suspect. But, man. Hey, repeat here, everybody, and with my co-host...
Hey, Fig. I'm in Denver today. I don't know where you are. Actually, I do know you're at home, aren't you, Repeat, in New Hampshire?
I am.
And it's our pleasure to welcome Baron, our guest today. Welcome, Baron.
Welcome back. Hello.
Yeah, and that is terrifying. I can't wait to hear the rest of it, but we've got some more things to ask before we get to that.
We do indeed. What's our first question, Fig?
So I know you went to Marine Corps OCS in October of 1966. I'm assuming with an air contract. However, what got you interested in aviation to start with? Or was that it?
Aviation started a long time ago in high school and in college. And I used to have a lot of dates, and I would take them down to LAX airport, park behind the restaurant called the Proud Bird.
Yeah.
And watch airplanes fly in. And unfortunately, I never had a lot of repeat dates.
They just probably didn't.
But that was my start in aviation. And I got to school, I got out of college, and I realized I didn't want to walk the ground. So I found out that flying was a lot easier. So I drove down the street looking for a Navy recruiter because I'd taken my Navy flight physical. And the Navy recruiter was a Marine standing outside a recruiting depot, and I asked him where the Navy recruiter was, and I told him why I wanted to fly. And he said, well, the Marines fly Navy airplanes. Come on inside.
Oh, boy.
So I did. And OCS was just around the corner in October, and I marched there and got on the yellow footprints, and that started my career.
How about that?
Welcome to
So
Quantico.
just to make sure I heard you right, sir, you said the Marine Corps recruiter says, Marine Corps flies Navy airplanes. We could take care of that for you. Right?
That's right. And I liked his uniform.
Yeah. All right.
Well, there you go. And that helps with the dates, for what it's worth.
Yeah. So that was like the summer of 1966-ish when you talked to the recruiter?
I got out of college. I got home, and my mom waved a little letter in front of me and says, congratulations. And I opened the letter up and it said, congratulations, welcome to the Army, you've been drafted.
Oh, shit.
So I had 1 July, I had to make the decision 1 June, I had to make the decision. And so I went down that day, which was like about 28, 29 May. And that's when I joined the Marine Corps and voided my contract with the Army and found out I could have an aviation contract and could fly much better than walking.
That was a good call.
Very good call. Walking looks like it sucks in Vietnam.
Yeah, 28 years later, it's still walking. I'm still flying.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, so OCS, and then so we talked about it. It was Camp Rupture, as I like to refer to it, Camp Rupture, and then down to main
Still
side.
owes you an apology, by the way.
And then, yeah, it does indeed. And then from there, did you go to TBS, or were you in the groups that went? Because they did it for a while, and then they didn't. Did you go straight to flight school?
I went straight to flight school. I got graduated on, I think it was December 13th. I flew home, which was a Friday. I flew home on Saturday. I got home, and I found out that I had to get married. So, I had to get married. I got married on Sunday.
That's probably a separate story.
Wedding, was it?
Anyway, so got married on Sunday, and on Tuesday we took off for Pensacola.
Wow, that's fast. That was fast.
That was fast.
So
I got to Pensacola on about January 1st, got an apartment, and then checked into flight school around the end of January. And they put me in a flight pool for about, 3 or 4 months. And got to spend a lot of time doing volunteering for golfing, swimming, stupid study swimming, by the way.
yes,
And I was a qualified lifeguard, and they made me do the stupid study swim qual.
unbelievable.
And then I also qualified and did a couple of stints with the astronaut training program because they call it the dummy boy. And they put you in the centrifuge and make you walk for a couple of hours after you went through the centrifuge. And I found out you can get violently sick.
Oh boy.
Good bet.
So we started flight school. We started ground school in March, and then we got to I'm trying to think of the name of the field. The Softly field. It was.
Softly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Started at Softly. Flew there and then found out I wanted to go fixed wing. And at the time, I had quite a pretty good grade record going in. And unfortunately, by the time we got there, they had used up all the Marine Corps requirements for fixed wing aircraft. And after asking the CO if I could still go for a fixed wing, and a couple other guys did. They took two and borrowed Navy contracts or Navy spots, put two Marines in there, and I was number 3. So I had to go to Softley Field and start my T-28 training.
Okay.
Is that the first? Did you fly that first T-28 back then?
I flew T-34s first, which was the Bravo model,
Okay.
and then we did that till we got safe for solo, and then we went to Whiting Field and flew T-28s.
And at that point, did you already know that you got drafted for helos, or were you still?
No, I didn't know. They said when you get to Whiting Field, you can make a choice again.
Okay.
So I, just stupid idiot, I believed them and found out I didn't really have a choice.
Yeah, they're probably doing a big helo draft because that's who they needed the most of, right?
No, I know. It was 10 months and you're out, and then overseas, and if you got home, we'll talk to you then.
Wow.
Right. So you had a choice. You could go helos or rotary wing then, I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
I had to say, I'm rotary wing. So when I got to the West Coast, they were going to put me in a squadron called 462, and the last aircraft I wanted to fly was a 46. I hate to say that,
Yeah.
but I didn't really like 46s. And so they said 462 is a squadron because I heard 46 and 2. I thought it was a 46 squadron. So I got over there and found out, thank God, it was a 53 squadron. And it just stood up and started getting airplanes from the Sikorsky factory. And there were 3 models. And we trained there for, 7 or 8 months. And the whole squadron packed up, went aboard ship. And unfortunately, I was the embarkation officer and had to figure out how to be an embark officer without going to school. Got the squadron packed up, put them on an LPD, and with some of the pilots on the LPD, and we all flew over I think it was Air America. And we all flew over and joined up in Da Nang and went up to Fubai and started my 14 months overseas.
That was a pretty quick turnaround. That was a pretty quick turnaround from the time you got your wings to the time you stepped off the airplane in Vietnam. That was like, what, 14 months? 18 months?
Oh, 7 months.
7 months. Holy shit.
7 months.
Welcome to the Marine Corps, right? Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So
It was
No kidding.
was H-34s, were they not putting guys in H-34s anymore in 67?
They still were, but they were transitioning to 53s and 46s.
Okay.
I know some of the plowbacks or some of the guys returning from Vietnam were 34 pilots, and they're training us in 53s. And when I finished up my training at Ellison Field, my last aircraft I flew was an H-34.
Oh,
Got about 30, 40 hours in that.
okay.
And then
Okay.
transitioned out, got my wings, and went to good old Tustin.
All right.
Nice. Okay. Did you ever run across Sugar, Bill Spicer, at that time frame?
I think so. I can't remember. The name's familiar.
Yeah. We've had him on a couple shows. He wrote 5 books, Sea Stories of a U.S. Marine, everything from his enlistment to retiring as the VMA 231 Squadron CO. So,
Okay.
yeah, interesting books. All right. So you wind up out on the West Coast. Then I'm sorry, I lost track a little bit. You hit the West Coast, and you were in Vietnam within 7 months of wings.
We got there, and I got to the West Coast in February, and the latter part of August we were in Vietnam.
Wow.
The whole squadron. Getting to go.
Because that's when you want to go to Vietnam, August.
Oh, yeah. I loved it. Lovely time. And if you're really lucky,
Hotter than the surface of the sun.
you go to China Beach, and if you really were lucky. I never was that lucky.
Okay.
So
Oh, man.
the story that you led off with, your So There I Was story, that was during your first tour, right? That very first.
That was probably about 3 or 4 months into my first tour.
Okay.
We were coming back. It was a morning. We had the morning sortie. Our sorties were 6 o'clock to about noon, or 6 hours a day. Then we did troop removals, casualty assistance, and then resupply. And we completed our morning shift, so to speak, and we were flying back to Fubai when the engine imploded. And I remember looking back in the back and asking if everyone was okay back there, and all it was the hydraulic fluid had flashed through there in a giant flash of fire.
Oh, boy.
And I thought we were going to die. And I looked over to my aircraft commander, and he thought so too, so he wasn't flying anymore. And I remember flying the aircraft and looking down, and noticed the hydraulic systems are starting to fluctuate. In the first stage, we have 3 stages: a utility, a first stage, and a second stage. The first and second stage control all your aircraft controls or aircraft movement. And the first stage was starting to get extremely low, so I remember turning it off. And we flew I found Camp Eagle out there, which was the Army base. And I made a call and told them we have an emergency and we're coming in hot. And I don't know if we're going to make it there, or if we could not make it there, we could go over Camp Eagle and crash in the ocean, so to speak. So we made it to Camp Eagle and made a landing there, luckily.
Was it a controlled kind of crash landing, or was it actually a?
It was kind of controlled. We lost our first stage completely by now, and when I got to the ground, our second stage was starting to deplete. And so by the time we get down and shut the aircraft down, the hydraulics were failing and they were beating against your legs. But we were already on the ground, so that was a pretty good day.
And Baron, for our listeners that aren't aviation experts, the CH-53 is the Marine Corps heavy lift helicopter. Can you just kind of give a blanket statement of that, what that mission is for that helicopter?
Primarily, it was a logistic resupply, a troop hauler. It could hold about 36 troops, or in a bad day, you could hold about 100 Vietnamese troops in there. We hit that a couple of times.
That's good.
And unfortunately, on the day we had 100, a couple of them got airsick and started puking. So with the sympathetic pukers out there,
oh shit,
the back of the aircraft smelled really good.
I'm sure it did.
And so we could do resupply and lift about 6,000 to 8,000 pounds of weight with an Alpha model. It went to 10,000 pounds with the Super A's or the then to be Delta models, and they actually got up to about 14,000 pounds without asking for permission. You could get it up there. And
you had for weapon system only for defense, really, right? Had door guns.
You had 2 door guns. We started out with 50 cals, and the CEO at the time decided the 50 cals weighed too much, so we went down to M60s, and they never worked. I remember one time we saw a tiger on the side of the hill walking by remnants of an old 8-4, and I climbed out of the cockpit and wanted to shoot the tiger and bring it home and have a token. I remember that gun sprayed all over the hillside, but the tiger just looked at me like, "You stupid fool," and he walked away.
You hit everything except the tiger with the M60.
Well, we hit the mountain pretty good.
Oh, that's great.
Nice.
Oh, shit.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm writing that one down.
Man. So, so how long were you in Vietnam, and when did you get back stateside? How long was that tour? Was that a full year?
We were there about 14 months the first time. And we got there. I got home October the following year. And it was not too bad, actually. We lived in Quonset huts. I cycled because I was a junior lieutenant. I cycled between Quonset huts and Southeast Asia hooches, which were canvas tents and a tin roof. And then when I got senior enough, they moved me back into the Quonset hut. And it was comfortable. I became an aircraft commander by then, and we needed 500 hours in our total time, and then we could become aircraft commanders.
Okay. And how many hours a month were you flying on average? It sounds like you had 6 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week was.
I had the first tour overseas in the first year. I came home with about 1,400 hours total in model, and we flew quite a bit. And then when I retired, I had over 6,000 hours in model, and a couple other several hundred hours in A4s, OV-10s, C-130, and a couple other helicopters.
Okay. Well, how'd you wind up in A4s and OV-10s and all that?
When I was in Mach 2 Pack, Mach 2 Land, Mach 2 Pack.
Okay.
Our CEO, Ray Hanley, he encouraged us to fly as many aircraft as we could because we were trying to put together Project 19, which eventually became WTI.
Okay.
And we needed experience across the board to learn how to write our lesson plans and experience in different aircraft as to what we're going to do. low-level flight, terrain avoidance, evasive maneuvering against fixed-wing aircraft and helos. And so we got to fly A4s, or I was told to go fly A4s. So I flew about 10 missions in A4s after getting qualified, not qualified, but backseat qualified. How do you speak that? How do you say that?
There you go. Okay. Nice. Well, so I guess I'm interested in the impetus of how MAWTS came to be then, because we've talked about it before on the show, and it's been kind of compared to the Top Gun for the Marine Corps. It's really a school of how we go to war with our air ground task force. And so what was the impetus that said, okay, we need to do this MAWTS thing?
On my second, I had just gone back from my second tour overseas, and I got stationed up at El Toro, and I was the operations officer, as a captain in a squadron called 362, and there was not a lot of majors around at the time, so there's a CO, and I think one major and a whole bunch of captains. Being a senior captain at the time, I was the OPSO. One day, after about a year as OPSO, I got called into the CO's office, and he said, I'm going to send you over to El Toro if you want to do it, but I can't keep you as OPSO because there's too many majors around and they want your job. So I nodded and said, okay, what's the job you're going to send me to? And he said, MAWTS-2 PAC. And I couldn't figure out what MAWTS-2 PAC was. And anyway, he said, it's over there and there's something called Project 19 you have to be ready for. So I got over to MAWTS-2 PAC, and we stood up a bunch of lieutenants and captains and a couple majors, all stood around trying to figure out what to do. And this guy, our CO, Ray Hanley, said, I want you to figure out what we need to teach everybody about what we're going to do in the future when we have future combat. And so I remember listening around, looking at, okay, we had to learn how to fly low, navigate, fly at night, and then fly against fixed-wing aircraft. If the occasion ever arose itself, how would you fly against fixed-wing aircraft, which was evasive maneuvering. And so we did that for about a year, living in little Quonset huts at El Toro. And we had the East Coast come over and join us, and the East Coast MAWTS-2 LANT, and helped us write lesson plans for all kinds of different classes. Lesson plans were the hardest thing I ever had to do.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we did that. Went over and stole airplanes from the West Coast and the East Coast, took them down to Yuma.
Nice.
And basically flew them for a couple weeks, and then finally matured into what we called a WTI, Weapons Tactics Instructors course. Then after a while, they decided to move us down to Yuma, and my orders came through, and they said, okay, I'd like to go to Yuma. And they went down there, and I became the office OIC of the Helo department. And basically, WTI started there, and we lived in the old barracks the old office spaces in the wing headquarters or the group headquarters, and started from there. And then eventually they built out from there and built into their own basic unit. And then probably about a year after we got there, MAWTS-2 PAC and MAWTS-2 LANT became Marine Air Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1, which is MAWTS-1, and the home of WTI.
Well, that's great.
Okay. And WTI, I don't know if we said it or not, Weapons and Tactics Instructor.
Yeah, Barron said it.
I just want to clarify that. Okay.
Well, you're a historic figure, because I've never met anybody, from the Marine Corps that was in the beginning stages, the ground floor, so to speak, of MAWTS, and you're it.
Well, before that, there's another interesting story. When I was at MAWTS-2 PAC, we got assigned to go to Fort Rucker, Alabama, because they're going to teach us how the Army, flew low-level tactics in helicopters, and how they were going to navigate in helicopters. And we thought we were the cat's meow at the time. So we went down and flew with the Army in Hueys, and after about a week and a half down there was 10 of us, some from MAWTS-2 LANT, most of us from MAWTS-2 PAC. And we got down there, and the guy said, the last thing I'm going to teach you is night vision goggles. So we got down there, and we got these little plastic devices that fit over your head with a strap went around your head, and your helmet went over the strap. And we flew on night vision goggles, and you could see out there. It was like flying in the old days. It was flying like a very narrow 30-degree field of view. And
it's looking through a cereal box, right?
Oh, exactly. Toilet paper rolls.
Oh, there you go.
And so we did that for about 4 or 5 nights. And then we decided it was time for us to go back home. And Doc Bama was the OIC of the Helo department at MAWTS-2 PAC. And he and I and a bunch of other guys stole some night vision goggles. And that was the first night vision goggles the Marine Corps ever had because we got them from the Army, unbeknownst to them. We
acquired.
And we acquired them, yes, right. And so we took them down to Yuma, and then we had them in a locker there, and we had 10 sets. And once we started flying at night with them, F4 guys came by, the AB8 guys came by and tried it. And next thing you know, everyone was trying to steal our goggles.
Oh, yeah.
And so we got our goggles, and we got a few more, and then we still had the straps on, and they had to put our helmet on over the straps. And then Desert Storm started, Eagle Pull started up, and I became the lead instructor for the Eagle Pull Regiment for the Iranian rescue mission.
We're going to talk about FTIratings.com and those folks who help us bring these stories to you.
Fellow aviators, this is Fig from So There I Was, and today I'm talking about an essential step in your professional flying career. That's right, earning that type rating or advancing to your ATP with FTIratings.com. For those transitioning from military flying to the cockpit of a commercial airliner, or for civilian pilots ready to step up, FTIratings.com is your premier destination. They specialize in getting you through that crucial type rating and the ATP or ATP CTP certification that are required gateways for flying with major airlines. Navigating through the requirements for advanced certifications can be complex, but FTIratings.com makes it straightforward. They offer expert guidance and instruction tailored to help seasoned pilots like you achieve your goals in the aviation industry. Every FTI instructor is a veteran who has been through this very process and knows exactly what to teach you to get you ready for your ATP or type certificate. And if you're looking to maximize your benefits, FTIratings.com is an excellent choice for using your VA benefits. How about that? Plus, just for our listeners, when you mention So There I Was during your registration, you'll get $100 off your first course. It's a great way to kickstart your advanced training and save some money as you prepare for the next big leap in your flying career. And don't forget, no matter where you are, you can prepare using their iPad-based study materials at a time and location that's convenient for you. So whether you're aiming for that Boeing or Airbus cockpit or gearing up to earn your ATP, FTIratings.com is your co-pilot in professional aviation training. With their specialized courses and expert instructors, you're not just learning, you're getting ready to take command of an airliner. Thanks for joining me on this flight path to success. Remember, with FTIratings.com, clear skies aren't as far away as they seem.
So let me ask, before we go into Eagle Pull, can you just quickly define what MAWTS-2 PAC and MAWTS-2 LANT is? I realize it's Pacific and Atlantic. I'm not sure what the TU is, Marine Air Weapons.
Oh, Marine Air Weapons Training Unit.
Training Unit.
MAWTS-2, okay.
It used to be for A4s, A6s, and they were dropping special valued ordnance, primarily nuclear weapons. And they would figure out how to drop them, and the envelopes they would use to drop them in. There were little cuts out there that were cement down by the golf course at El Toro. And we would live in those things for about a couple of years. Not a couple of years, several months until we built some training buildings out there behind us. And that's where the WTI was held.
I'm glad you defined MAWTS-2 PAC because I was thinking it was 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing on the Pacific side, and I'm thinking, what? Like some kind of detachment?
Yeah.
There's a land
training unit.
Yeah, training unit. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
PAC
Thanks for asking.
And LANT, Atlantic. So very cool. All right. So then you got tapped to be the lead for Eagle Pull. Can you describe what Eagle Pull was, please?
Eagle Pull was the attempt to rescue the hostages that were being held as of the first part of November in 1979. The Iranian students jumped the fence and took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. And they took about 63 Americans as hostages. Some of them escaped and got home on their own. And there was 53 of them, I think, left. And our job was to figure out how to get them home. So
Okay.
it started.
How long was that planning process? That must have been weeks, months.
Horrendous. When it first started, are we live now?
Yes.
Okay. When it first started out, I was just a instructor at MAWTS, and
Okay.
couldn't figure out why nobody asked MAWTS what to do about this special admission. So we sat there through the first 2 weeks of November, including the Marine Corps Ball, and no one called us. Then we heard through the grapevine that some guys on the East Coast were practicing going into various places and scaring the hell out of people on the East Coast with helicopters at night. And then a guy named Charles Pittman, who was at the time a colonel, would come out to MAWTS and be a speaker, MAWTS WTI and MAWTS-1. He's going to be a speaker at the first one of our classes out there. I was sitting at home one night in Yuma, and I get this phone call, and it's Chuck Pittman. And he says, "Why don't you come on down to Yuma and meet me in the BOQ?" So I went down to the BOQ, and it was a Sunday night. And he said something along the line as where your name came up, and we want to use you as an instructor to teach these guys how to fly with night vision goggles. And I said, "Great. Am I flying or what?" He said, No, you're right in the jump seat. You're an instructor. And I
Oh, boy.
Great.
So, oh, boy.
I sat around, and a couple of days later, a 141 came into Yuma Proving Grounds, and all these guys piled out, and these couple of helicopters were showing up through the days before and after, some Navy and some Marine Corps 53s. And I met the guys, and it was a Navy Marine Corps team. Because there were Navy aircraft, half the pilots were Navy guys, and the left seat guys were all Marines.
Okay.
They had night vision goggles experience, supposedly. And I found out that very few of them had ever seen a night vision goggle before, but they were flying with them. The Navy guys, I unfortunately took the night vision goggles and used them as periscopes and would bring them up to their eyes, look around, and drop them down to their chests, and they never put them on their helmet. And I remember flying with these guys at night and trying to be in the jump seat, explaining to them, you got to wear the damn things, and they wouldn't do it. So after about, a couple of weeks of flying out there on the jump seat, I remember telling General Pittman and General Vaught, or Colonel Pittman and General Vaught at the time, these pilots ain't going to hack it. And I remember going out to a tent in the middle of the desert with the special ops guy and General Vaught, and we sat down there, and I had a list of names of pilots that I had written down that I thought would be better than doing that. And plus, I would bring the other two pilots from MAWTS-1, a guy named B.J. McGuire and Rance Steinmeier, bring them over as they were 53 instructors at the time, and bring them over to Yuma Proving Grounds, which we located all our assets at, and we would start flying out of there. And so we did that, and we brought in a couple of new pilots, and some of the Navy guys departed, unfortunately, and went to the Kitty Hawk out of Diego Garcia, and they were no longer part of the mission. So we kept some Navy guys. Some Navy guys matured back to the fleet, so to speak, and we went on training and started training all the way up through April 18th, I think it was, or maybe 20th. Of 1980, and then we got in a C-141 and flew to Diego Garcia and on to C-Woman, joined the Nimitz out to sea, and all the Navy aircraft were stuck below deck. And a couple months earlier, I had gone out to the Nimitz, and I had flown all the Navy aircraft except for two. And I had a maintenance officer with me and a communications officer. The communications officer set up certain kind of lines of communication on the ship so they could communicate with folks back in the Pentagon and elsewhere. And the maintenance officer and I went through all the aircraft and tried to figure out the good and the bad and the ugly and what we needed to do with the aircraft when we got ready to get ready for the mission, if the mission were to go, because we had several times we thought we would be ready to go on the quote mission, and it got delayed or changed. And we thought it was going to be a humanitarian mission, a military mission, or unfortunately a NAPID, which is a nuclear mission. And basically paid it, but that was all turned around, and we found out that the sanctions that the president at the time and his special group were working on would basically have the hostages released by, I don't know, end of February or earlier, maybe even by Christmas. So we would build up, stand down, build up, stand down. And when we did did our training out there, we put the goggles on at night and we would fly a certain route. And then the routes got longer and longer, and they were from 2 hours to 4 hours to 6 hours and sometimes 8 hours. And then we would and we'd bring the aircraft back and tie them down at Yuma Proving Grounds, and we'd live in the BOQ out there, and we'd just go to sleep for a day or two until they gave us a phone call and said, okay, tonight's mission is back on and thought you need to do some more training. So off we went.
Can I interrupt you for a second and ask a question? I'm assuming that during this time period, while you guys were flying out of Yuma Proving Grounds, this was all like secret, no foreign. You couldn't talk about it. Couldn't talk about what.
We couldn't talk about. The only one that knew what we were doing was the CEO of MAWTS-1, and because Pittman was going over there and making sure that he knew what we did, so we got the admin support necessary to act as a squadron, so to speak. We weren't really a squadron; we were a detachment, but we had I don't know, about 24 pilots at one time. I can't remember them all, and we got down to 18 for the actual mission. 18 for the actual mission.
And you were, and when you actually launched on the mission, you guys launched off the Nimitz out of the Persian Gulf? That's
correct. We did.
Okay. That's like 600 miles from Tehran. No wonder your missions were so long.
They were long. They were.
So that had to involve refuel planning, right? Refueling somewhere?
Well, we did, in our training, we did air-to-air refueling with C-130s and 53s. It was probably the first time we used 53s, but we weren't the first because the Air Force had done it before. But we had an instructor down there, Rod Davis, who actually was the pilot in Ship 5, which turned around and went back to the Nimitz on the night of the mission. He was the, quote, instructor that took us out and taught us how to fly 53s and C-130s for aerial refuel. And we borrowed the aerial refueling aircraft from, I think it was Air Force aircraft out in New Jersey, which was actually out of Long Island. And we did that for a while. But the night of the mission, we had full drop tanks, full inside tanks, and then we had 2 or 3, some aircraft had 3 refueling tanks inside, which were fiberglass tanks, which I think they held 150 gallons each.
Okay. To be emptied and then pushed off later?
We were going to push them out at Desert 2, after our hide site, so to speak. We're going to push them out the rear and then bring in the whoever wanted a ride home. From,
wow.
Right.
This is good stuff, man. This is good stuff.
This is amazing. So I don't know if it's an impolitic question or not. I'm going from what I remember from being, as I mentioned in the pre-show chat, I was a senior in high school when this mission went down. And I remember hearing that, everybody wanted their fingers in the pie and the planning. Everybody wanted part of it and all that. And how much of that is true and how much of that is urban legend, I guess?
A lot of it's urban legend because a lot of people didn't even know we were doing this.
Okay.
Even our folks in MAWTS-1 back in Yuma didn't know, except for the fact that when I could, I would hop in my car and drive back into town and meet up with my girlfriend and my neighbors, and they would say, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going out of town tomorrow." They go, "Right, we know where you're going." And so we didn't. a lot of folks did not know what we were actually doing until it actually happened. And then we asked some Air Force guys, and so a guy named Russ Rakip came out, and we had some Navy guys and some Army refueling team members that were part of the team that refueled the aircraft on the ground when we were there, and in regular operations, training operations before.
So, all right, do you have a question to ask, Repeat? Because if not, I'm going to fire.
No, roll in hot.
So,
hot.
The night of the mission, when we launched on the actual mission off the Nimitz, we hit the fog or the haboots, so to speak. Do you want to hear about that?
Yeah, the sandstorms.
The sandstorm.
Yeah, the haboob.
We were flying along, and we were probably an hour and a half to 2 hours into the mission, and it was clear as a bell outside. And we had a little town out there in the middle of Tehran, or middle of Iran, called Bam. And because it was a line of communication or that went east to west, we figured what we'll do is take all the aircraft, and instead of, we trained so we could fly the mission by ourselves, or we could fly the mission as a group. And when we did that, we got briefed beforehand that when we got to Bam, as we flew as a group, when we got to Bam, we would all spread out and go abreast, fly across this road down there and the line Bam. And because they had gendarmerie stations around there, which are police stations, so if they heard an aircraft fly overhead, they'd just hear it once and not make a big effect. And as soon as we crossed Bam, we started getting back together again. And that's when I noticed that the visibility was starting to wane a little bit. And I was the number 3 aircraft, or the alternate lead, and aircraft 1 and 2 disappeared from sight. So I did the old NATOPS lost plane procedure and turned a little bit to the right. And aircraft 4 and aircraft 5, I was aircraft number 3. 4 and 5 stayed on my wing, and we couldn't see the ground anymore, so we went down to about 100 to 200 feet. And I remember in the old days flying the Lynx trainer back in Whitingfield.
Yes.
Right.
You had the Lynx trainers?
I've seen one.
I know what a Lynx trainer is.
Yeah. It's a stick and some rudders, and
it's a box. It's a box.
It's basically a tube, a box that slid over.
Yeah, with a couple little instruments in it.
And so I remember thinking, thank God for the Lynx trainer, because that night I was flying at 100, 200 feet. When you could see the ground at 100 feet, it was fine. We got to 200 feet. It was a little iffy, so we went back down to 100 feet. And I remember the co-pilot I was with, Les Petty, I kept asking him, how we doing? He said, any wires out there? And he said, no, there's nothing out here. And we would
was the terrain generally flat at this point?
After Bam, it was flat, and we were flying along for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I didn't know that 1 and 2 had circled back and landed. And I think aircraft number 6 had gone down with a bad blade. I didn't know that. And aircraft number 8 had come by and picked up the crew, as was briefed. And then they proceeded on. So 8 was by himself. I was by myself, 3, 4, and 5. And all of a sudden, as we were flying along at 100 feet, and I had a little radar altimeter down there, and as soon as it went below 100 feet, we'd bring it back up to 100 feet, and that was as low as I was going to go. And finally, the co-pilot, Les, said, by the way, we got a 6,000-foot mountain out here.
What?
I remember climbing up to 6,000 feet slowly as I could, making sure 4 and 5 stayed with me. And we got up to 6,000 feet, and sure enough, off to our left was this dome mountain that about 6,000 feet. So I said, and we broke out of the clear, and I could see the top of the mountain there. And I thought, that's really good. Is it clear now? And we turned to and he said, no, we got to go to, I think it was 065 or 095 was the next heading. And we were at 6,000 feet. So we turned to the new heading, and he said, by the way, there's a 9,000-foot mountain out here.
Oh, shit.
Oh, shit. And about that time, we went back into the cloud, or the dust storm. And I remember flying along. Initially, I first lost visibility, I thought it was a fog we were flying in. I said, "Is there a lake out here?" He said, "No." So I remember licking my finger and sticking out the little window by my side, and I butted back in and tasted it again, and it was dusty. And I said, "That's a dust storm." I'd never seen one like that before. No one ever told us about it. And so we climbed to 9,000 feet, crossed the 9,000-foot mountain, and about a couple minutes later, I saw a big flame on the ground, and I thought one of the 130s had crashed. And unfortunately, it was the gas truck that they had shot a anti-tank round at the gas truck and blew up. And so we used that. I came down, flew around by the gas truck, and all of a sudden I flew a little bit ahead, and I could see 6 C-130s on the ground, so I figured they all made it. So we came back in and landed, and then I went to school.
So it's you 3 birds, and then 8, you said 8 was still there, so you had 4 birds?
We had, at the time, 5 had turned around when we got to the 6,000-foot mountain. That was our point of no return.
Okay.
So by the time we got to the 6,000 feet, we were just 3 and 4 with myself and my
you,
Barney Oldfield.
Okay.
And so we continued on. When we landed at the Desert One, that's when I hit a rut from one of the C-130s that had turned off to the right at about 45 degrees, and I hit it with my nose landing gear, and it turned sideways and deflated the 2 front tires. So like a wounded frog, I had to hop into place at the refueling site, and we had black hoses out there, so you had, besides being dusty, you could see underneath the dust a little bit, so you could see your refueling spot. And then they refueled us, and I kept thinking about maybe that we have too much gas because we're at a density altitude that was pretty high, and I didn't realize how much gas we had taken, so I was trying to figure it all out when our friend Charging Charlie Beckwith came over and wanted to know where everybody else was. And by that time, there were just 2 aircraft there, and I said, well, the other aircraft will be here shortly, or otherwise they'll be in the side of a mountain. So he didn't know anything about the dust storm because they flew over it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Wow.
So pretty soon, aircraft 1, 2, and 6, I believe, 7 came in and landed, and then aircraft number 8 came in, but number 2 had a hydraulic problem, and the pump had failed, and when we looked at it, it was glowing red hot, so it had failed.
Okay.
Nice.
Wow.
So
we went from 6 down to 5 airplanes, and that's when Colonel Beckwith at the time said, it's a no-go. We don't have enough to get all the troops in there and get them out.
Okay. So you were about to abort the mission when things south.
I'd gotten out of the aircraft and walked around the front, and I was composing myself, so to speak. And the co-pilot, we were still turning and burning.
Yep.
So the co-pilot was at the stick. Then I got back in, and he got out, and he relieved himself, so to speak. And yeah, we were sitting down there, kind of fat, dumb, and happy. And that's when we said that it's an abort, and we're going to get enough fuel to get back to the Nimitz. Now we can compute how much fuel we had to get before we got back to the Nimitz. And that's when they said, okay, you're going to have to move your aircraft. And so the aircraft number, the far left aircraft, C-130, had to turn around and go back to the south and take off and get back to his base because he was running out of fuel. So that's when we took off and we're trying to move forward. The dust was so bad that the guy that I was keying off of was in front of me. He was a radio operator, and he was probably maybe 60, 70 yards in front of us. When I lifted off, he got dust in his face and started walking backwards. And I didn't realize he was walking backwards, and I think I drifted into the wingtip of the C-130, and that's when the accident happened.
Man.
Oh man, and that's brutal. Now that you were pretty badly injured when that happened, right?
I was sitting I just remember waking up and the aircraft was on fire. We had landed upright, but we had hit the aircraft next to us. I didn't know we had hit a C-130. All I knew is I woke up and my helmet was off and the fire was in the back, and my crew chief, Dewey Johnson, was there, and he said, "How are we doing?" I said, "Get in your ass in the cockpit." I remember reaching over for my co-pilot, and he was gone already. And so I remember trying to get Johnson back into the cockpit because there was no fire up there, and there was fire in the back. And I didn't know what we were going to do if we got up there. About that time, he let go of my arm, and I could hear this scream. I'll probably never forget that the rest of my life.
Oh, boy.
And then it was just me in the cockpit, and I remember trying to figure out. I was dating a lady whose father was an Air Force guy, and I figured, being an ornery old critter, the last thing he wanted to see is my corpse with my arms across my chest, laying in laying in the pilot's seat. So I figured if I could jump out the window, though, at least he could be striving to trying to get away from the fire. So I jumped out the window and got burned there, and laid on the ground, and then I walked away from the fire. And the C-130 that was next to the first C-130, he had stopped, and they're getting ready to take off. And then he had loaded all the crews and a lot of the special ops guys in the back. And the crew chief came out, picked me up, and helped me get in the aircraft. And then we took off and went back to Masseria.
Wow, that sounds chaotic and terrifying all at the same time.
It was.
It does indeed.
And of course, it was darker than the inside of a cat, right? With all the dust and dark and no moon.
For me, there was a moon out there, but there was a lot of dust. The ground was like baby powder. As soon as you touched it, it just turned to floated in the air around you.
Yeah, I'm familiar with
subtle,
that.
like it did in the deserts out west.
Right. Oh,
wow.
Oh, heart-wrenching. Absolutely heart-wrenching.
And where did the C-130 land? Back in Dago?
Actually, he landed in Egypt in a former Russian base. Half the base was run by British communications folks, and the Air Force decided to come in there and use the runway and the hangars to pre-stage the C-130s out of there. So that we went back to Masseria, and in Egypt, and they had set up some evacuation tents and some shelters there. And I remember the Brits came over with a couple cases of beer, ice cold. I remember drinking. I was awake enough to drink the beer, and I drank too.
There you go.
So the next thing you know, they had some C-9s fly in and pick us up and took us up to Germany.
Okay.
And we started away.
How long were you in the hospital afterwards?
I was probably there about a month and a half. We went to Ramstein, and then the next morning they took us out of there rapidly and put us on a 141, flew us to Dover, Delaware, and then we flew down to Brooks Burn Center in
San Antonio.
And so at the Burn Center, I was there with my co-pilot, Les Petty. When he got out of the aircraft, the left sponson had broken, and he kind of sat down in a pool of fuel, and he ran away, and then he turned around and watched the airplane start to burn, and he stood there, and all of a sudden the fire came by and burned him between his legs and his back, and he got burned up pretty bad.
Ooh. So
he was okay after a while, but he was in the hospital a lot longer than I was. So I was there till, I don't know, May sometime, maybe end of May. And then we got to go back to Yuma. Went back to Yuma, and another WTI class was starting. So we were there for the WTI class, I don't know, 5 and 6 or 6 and 7. And then went to Command Staff College.
So you did all that, and then got back to Yuma, and it's a Wednesday. Get your ass back in. Get your ass back
to Yuma, and I was kind of like on a no-fly list. So I had to go back to the Brooks Burn Center and get an upjit. So I got the upjit from the doctor. And anyway, so went back there, came back to Yuma and flew some more. With the Air Force, I got stationed to go to, they had a little operation that was trying to replicate what we were trying to do with the Air Force and their C-130, Air 53s called Honey Badger. So I flew out there to work with the honey badger crew and give lessons learned. And anyway, it was another harrowing experience out there. So we went out to Yuma Proving Grounds and spent another 3 or 4 weeks out there, or I did. And then I came back to Yuma and it was flying again.
Nice. Well, in the interest of our new format, folks, we're going to break it off here for the week and say thank you so much for your service, sir, including a nice comment from Judge Evie Court. Thank you for all your service and blessings. And I could not agree more. Your service to this country is deeply appreciated, and your service to marine aviation. I'm assuming a lot of Marines are alive today because of the things you passed on to fellow aviators. So thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for your service. And I could talk to you all day, but I know you don't have that kind of time.
And thank you for your time. We appreciate you spending the time with us. We're deeply grateful. A couple other thank yous we need to get out there. Thanks to Dave Hamilton over at backbeatmedia.com. He handles our advertising. Dave has a couple shows of his own. The Business Brain for entrepreneurs, the Gig Gab for musicians, and the Mac Geek Gab. So listen to those shows if you're into any of that. Dave has some great broadcasting skills. So thank you to Dave. He gave us all the technology we needed to get this show off the ground. Fig, if you wanted to give us a rating, a 5-star rating, because you don't want to give us a 4 or less, how would you do
so
it?
there I was, .us/rate.
Go make it so.
Yeah, and if you can't give us 5 stars, tell us why, what we could do to make it 5 stars, because,
There you go.
well, we're trainable.
That's right. We've proven
Really? Yeah.
You got a helicopter guy in there, so you have to do it.
Yes.
Exactly. So if you want to get some cool merch, run over to stereos.us/merch. Get yourself a bikini, a clock, a shot glass, a coffee mug, a towel,
Hoodie.
hoodie, you name it. Yeah. And then BDS Aviation Photography says, awesome show. And we say awesome photography. Thank you, Badass, for loaning us the use of your photos. We're deeply grateful for that. So thanks to Sticks and Bago, who do all this extra work in the background to make our show sound better, look better. If you're watching on the live stream, watching the sausage get made, as it were, all the raw stuff that we never edit, it's all the works in there on the back, or on the Rumble, the YouTube, the Facebook pages, and all that. So there's facebook.com/therewwas.us. Yeah.
Thank you, Bago.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. And couple other folks we need to thank, Fig.
Well, that's the music of the 2 Air Force F-16 pilots that make the Air Force sound good. The Dos Gringos.
Love them.
Thank you, gents.
Thank you indeed. So, until next week, everybody, stay safe and don't sit on the collective.
Don't sit on the collective.
There I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the shit I was wearing on that day. Now an F-16 is cramped enough, but it's even worse with all that stuff supposed to save your life. But we knew there was no way. 'Cause when you're going down the North Atlantic, man, it's over.
What'd he say?
He said it's over.
Oh, okay. Hey, in honor of him going over there to Fort Rucker and acquiring some night vision goggles and doing some training with the Army, folks, let's just play this.
Where the hell have you been, soldier?
Training, sir! Training, sir!
What kind of training, son?
Army training, sir! Army training, sir!
And we are out.